He says, why didn't Zelensky and all of Ukraine fight for Crimea when the
That's right.
Russians illegally annexed it? And the Ukrainians, he forgets that the Ukrainians didn't have any money, that there was no way to fight back. And I think that's an important point as well. But no, things are not headed in a good direction. We know that the White House has lost patience with negotiations, and they found this entire negotiation exercise much more difficult than they expected.
Well, and certainly President Trump has suggested that Volodymyr Zelensky himself is contributing to that difficulty. The U.S. position seems to be, Melinda, that Ukraine is going to have to be willing to give up some territory if they ultimately want a settlement in this war. Is that the wrong way of thinking about this? How could they possibly reclaim all the territory that has been lost, Crimea included?
Hey, Kaylee, I don't think that's actually the stumbling point. So we've seen a 7-point peace plan, and that's what we thought they were going to be arguing about in London. And the real stumbling points are the U.S. is asking Ukraine to give up NATO membership. It's also asking it also wants to recognize Crimea as legally Russian. And this, I think it's worth reminding our audience, back in 2018, when Donald Trump was president the first time, the State Department issued something called the Crimea Declaration, and it said that we will never, ever recognize the use of force to take territory, that this is illegal under international law. So if you go back to Donald Trump's first administration, the policy that they're trying to push now is not very consistent. I mean, look, it's politics. No one's very consistent, but it's worth pointing out that they're in a very different position. So I don't think Zelensky is willing to concede some territory. I think he understands he has to, but the real issue is there's no security guarantees. And the U.S. is unwilling to give them security guarantees, and the British government has said that it must have a U.S. backstop. So we're sort of stuck. We're very stuck. But there's a bigger issue that I'm really worried about. So when Donald Trump and J.D. Vance say we're pulling out, I want to know what that means. Does that mean we're not going to participate in the process, or does that mean we're not going to cooperate with intelligence sharing, and we're not going to allow Europe to buy weapons for Ukraine? If it's the second, Ukraine is in a really hard spot. If it's we're not going to participate in the negotiations, I'm a lot less worried.
Interesting. In the end, though, Melinda, you've been talking to us since before the invasion actually took place. Every wrinkle, we've had a chance to get your analysis. Do you see any world in which there is a peace deal struck that does not favor Russia?
So I think it depends on the facts on the ground, but Ukraine is not going to agree to anything, Joe, unless there's some kind of security agreement to ensure that Russia doesn't come back. So right now, Russia occupies 20% of Ukraine, and they're likely going to have to give up some territory. But when I talk to medics on the front line, Joe, they tell me that we are totally committed to defending Ukraine, even if the U.S. is not there. So the mood in Ukraine has not changed, but I don't think the situation is ripe for negotiations at this point.
Well, Melinda, I want to return to your point about kind of characterizing what walking away actually means for the United States. If it were to be just we are removing ourselves as a third party in these negotiations, leaving it for either other countries to mediate or Ukraine and Russia to sort this out among themselves, would that actually make it easier for the Ukrainians, or does that make the whole thing more difficult because Vladimir Putin may not want to go ahead or essentially take this directly to Zelensky?
So the negotiating format is a little bit difficult, Kaylee. So right now, Putin is saying that he's willing to meet with Zelensky. And Zelensky has said before, I will not meet with him directly, that there has to be an intermediary. Zelensky is now saying, I'm willing to consider all formats, but you have to stop killing civilians. And that's one of the difficulties is Russia has not stopped its missile strikes. So that is a prerequisite for any kind of negotiation. To your bigger point, though, if the U.S. were to step back from being the lead negotiator, I think it's not the end of the world. I think Britain could take that place. I think that Turkey would be interested in taking that place. I think there's some Middle Eastern governments that might be willing to take that place. And Ukraine doesn't see Washington as a neutral actor at this point. Every one of the positions that they've been pushing in these negotiations is seen from Kiev as something that doesn't favor them. So I don't think it's a terrible thing if Washington walks away from the negotiations.
There was a time, Melinda, when peace appeared to hinge on the signing of a minerals deal. Remembering Scott Bessent's ill-fated trip to Kyiv, we're still, according to President Trump, expecting something to happen. Here's what he said about a minerals deal potentially happening this week.
We have a minerals deal, which I guess is going to be signed on Thursday, Scott, next Thursday, soon.
Yep.
And I assume they're going to live up to the deal, so we'll see. But we have a deal on that. No, I have no comment on that. I have no idea. That's his statement, not mine.
All right, so that was last Thursday. Melinda, will it still happen?
Joe, I don't know. I've been poking around on this. The expectation is that it was going to be signed tomorrow. That was 5 days ago where the initial agreement was signed between the United States and Ukraine. And it's an 80-page document. The details of that document haven't been released yet. But what's interesting is that this 7-point negotiating document that the United States gave Ukraine, one of the points was the mineral deal. So it seems like the mineral deal is contingent on Ukraine going along with this bigger plan that President Trump and Vice President Vance had envisioned. So I think it looks like it's in trouble, but let's watch and see.
Well, we certainly will be on watch tomorrow to see whether or not this deal ultimately is signed or if there's any progress toward it in the first place. But the original basis for it, Melinda, was that having an economic incentive or economic interest in Ukraine would be some kind of security guarantee. And obviously, we've discussed that thoroughly with you. In the absence of a deal being signed and the U.S. still not being willing to pony up on any other kind of security guarantees, what position does that realistically leave Ukraine in? I'm just trying to consider their position here as they decide whether or not to sign on the dotted line.
Right. So Ukraine is going to put increasing pressure on European governments, London in particular, to make good on the commitment to put troops on the ground and provide some kind of security backstop without Washington. I think that's where we're going next. And I wasn't privy to the discussions today. I'm sure that was discussed in London. And I think there'll be increasing pressure on Ukraine's other friends in Asia and in other parts of the world to deliver military kits so that Ukraine can stay in the fight and defend itself.
Was this always the direction we were going in here, Melinda? We're just kind of getting to the reality of the matter now? Or did that meeting in the Oval Office send things off the rails and potentially permanently for President Zelensky?
Joe, it's a great question. I've been told that President Trump was actually in a good mood and wanted progress in the relationship that day. And we still don't know why it was spiked. I think it's possible that Donald Trump, look, never say never with Donald Trump, right? It's possible he'll wake up tomorrow and say, I'm fed up with Vladimir Putin. He's unwilling to move. I don't see it happening, though, at this point. I think that Donald Trump wanted an easy deal. This is not going to be an easy deal. And I think he's going to move on, unfortunately, for 40 million Ukrainians.
Wow.
Wow. So Steve Witkoff, as he gets ready to head to Moscow, and Vladimir Putin has no real hope of success in your mind, Melinda?
Look, you can't force the Ukrainians to sign a deal that won't bring them lasting security. So I don't see how this deal goes forward. This is Witkoff's fourth trip. And I think they're going to discuss the peculiarities of this agreement. But Zelensky's already come out and said that accepting this agreement would violate the Constitution of Ukraine, and no president can do it.
Well, Melinda, I'm not sure what happens from here. What signs should we be watching for? Is it a meeting that includes Marco Rubio and Witkoff that would get your attention? What are you going to see that you might take seriously?
I'm going to be watching the battlefield. That's my eye is in Sumy in northern Ukraine. I want to see what the Russians are doing there, and I'm going to continue to watch and see. There's some interesting reports that North Korea is also sending workers to Russia, Joe, which indicates that Russia doesn't have enough people to be fueling its economy. So I don't think much is going to happen on the high level negotiations, but the real issue is the security guarantees and also the production of weapons in Europe. So watch that space.